Life has a way of turning upside down in the blink of an eye. One moment, you're 32, happily married and dreaming of a bright future with your partner. The next, you find yourself standing at the edge of a precipice, grappling with the reality of being a widow. My name is Emily, and this is my story. 6 months ago, my world shattered when my husband, Mark, died in a tragic car accident. The news hit me like a freight train, leaving me gasping for breath, drowning in a sea of grief. I remember the day vividly, the phone call that changed everything, the frantic rush to the hospital, and the gut-wrenching moment when I realized I would never see him again. In the weeks that followed, I was engulfed in a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and sleepless nights. If it hadn't been for my parents stepping in to help with the overwhelming details, I don't know how I would have managed. "Emily, honey, we've arranged everything with the funeral home," my mom said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You just focus on yourself right now." I felt lost, like a ship adrift at sea. The support group for people who had lost loved ones became my lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, I would sit in a circle with others who understood the hollow ache in my chest. Some days were harder than others, and I often found myself sharing my pain, my voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I wake up and, for a split second, I forget he's gone. But as the months passed, I began to navigate this new reality, unsure of what lay ahead. Little did I know, the storm was just beginning. The day of the accident is etched in my memory like a scar that refuses to heal. It was a typical Tuesday morning. Mark had kissed me goodbye, his smile bright and full of life as he headed out the door for work. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have him by my side, how we had so many plans for the future. Traveling, starting a family, building a life together. But that day, fate had other plans. The call came just after noon. "Emily, there's been an accident," the voice on the other end said, and my heart dropped. I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. When I arrived, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the frantic beeping of machines echoed in the background. The doctor's words were a blur, but I remember the look in his eyes, sympathy mixed with sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Emily. He didn't make it." Those words shattered my world. I felt as if the ground had been pulled from beneath me, leaving me suspended in a void of despair. The following weeks were a haze of grief. I struggled to make arrangements for the funeral, my hands shaking as I signed papers and chose flowers. My parents stepped in, taking charge of the details, but I felt like a ghost, floating through my own life. "Emily, we're here for you," my mom would say, her voice filled with concern. I was grateful for their support, but the weight of my loss was suffocating. I often found myself staring blankly at the walls of our home, haunted by memories of Mark. The laughter we shared, the dreams we built together, it all felt like a cruel joke. As I stood by his grave, the finality of it all hit me like a tidal wave. I was alone, and the future I had envisioned was gone. I had to find a way to pick up the pieces, but I didn't know where to start. In the aftermath of Mark's death, I found myself grappling with a profound sense of loneliness. The days blurred into one another, and I often felt like I was moving through a fog. My parents, while supportive, couldn't fully understand the depth of my pain. They had their own grief to contend with, and I felt like a burden, a weight. To cope, I joined a support group for widows. Every Tuesday evening, I would sit in a circle with others who had experienced similar losses. It was a safe space where I could share my feelings without judgment. "I sometimes feel like I'm drowning," I confessed one night, my voice trembling. "I don't know how to live without him." Maria, a woman who had lost her husband 2 years prior, reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's normal, sweetie. The grief comes in waves. Some days are better than others." Her words resonated with me, and I found solace in knowing I wasn't alone in my suffering. As the weeks turned into months, I began to confront the practical matters of life. Mark had left me well provided for. our house in the suburbs, an apartment downtown, and a substantial bank account. I could have quit my job as a graphic designer, but the thought of sitting alone in our empty house all day made my skin crawl. Instead, I switched to part-time work, just enough to keep my mind occupied. Surprisingly, my relationship with my parents began to shift. Growing up, I had always felt like an afterthought compared to my younger sister, Lily. They never missed her dance recitals or school plays, while my achievements barely warranted a mention. But after Mark's death, something changed. They seemed to focus more on me, asking about my work and offering support. "Emily, tell us more about that new project you're working on," my dad would say, genuinely interested for the first time. I savored these moments of connection, feeling like I finally had their attention. But that sense of comfort was short-lived. One evening, as we gathered for dinner, Lily walked in, 7 months pregnant. Her presence immediately commanded the room, and I felt the familiar ache of being overlooked settle back into my chest. "Emily, sit here," my mom fussed, practically pushing me aside to make room for her favorite daughter. I watched as all their attention shifted to Lily, who was glowing with excitement about her impending motherhood. "Who's the father?" I asked during dinner, trying to join the conversation, but Lily's face darkened and she snapped, "That's my business." I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in their reactions. When I was going through fertility treatments, they had demanded updates and offered unsolicited advice, but now they were protective of Lily, shielding her from questions. "Don't worry about my baby," Lily waved her hand dismissively, a smirk playing on her lips. "We won't need anything from anyone. I've got it all figured out." I should have paid more attention to that smile, but I had seen it too many times before. Lily was always cooking up get-rich-quick schemes that never panned out. I took another bite of my dinner, trying to swallow down the familiar feeling of being second best. Little did I know, the storm was brewing just beneath the surface, and the truth was about to unravel in the most shocking way. The call from Lily came on a Tuesday morning while I was at my desk, reviewing design reports. I almost let it go to voicemail, as our conversations were usually brief and awkward, but something compelled me to answer. "Emily." Her voice was sweet, almost syrupy, the kind she used when she wanted something. "I'm having my baby shower next weekend at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love it if you could come." The invitation caught me off guard. The last real conversation we'd had was at Mark's funeral, and even then she seemed distracted and uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. I could count on one hand the number of times Lily had voluntarily included me in anything. "Of course," she laughed, but the sound felt forced. "You're my only sister. It wouldn't be right without you. Plus, I have something special planned." Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe this was her way of trying to bridge the gap between us. "I'll be there," I promised, already mentally listing possible gift ideas. As the day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I wanted to support my sister, but the thought of being in a room filled with people celebrating her pregnancy while I was still mourning my loss was daunting. The following Saturday, I arrived at my parents' house, carrying 2 carefully wrapped packages, a high-end baby monitor and a handmade blanket. Despite our differences, this was my future niece or nephew, and I wanted to show my love. The place looked like a pastel explosion had hit it. Pink and blue balloons everywhere, streamers hanging from every surface, and a towering diaper cake centerpiece. Trust Lily to turn this into an event. She had invited what looked like half the town. Aunt Margaret was there with her daughters, and my mom's bridge club friends occupied the sofa, while Lily's old college roommates clustered around the punch bowl, giggling over shared memories. I felt like an outsider, standing on the periphery of a celebration that wasn't mine. "Time for games," Lily announced, wading through the crowd in a flowing maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was glowing, but there was something predatory in her smile that made me uneasy. Her eyes kept finding mine across the room, holding my gaze a beat too long. We played all the traditional baby shower games, measuring Lily's belly with string, guessing the baby's birth date, and that horrible melted chocolate bar and diaper game. I won the belly measuring contest, which seemed to irritate Lily more than it should have. Throughout it all, she kept shooting strange looks my way, as if she was waiting for something. After the gifts were opened, Lily lingered over each onesie and baby gadget with theatrical enthusiasm. Then she clinked her glass for attention, and the room fell silent. My heart started racing for no reason I could name. The air felt suddenly thick, hard to breathe. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "But there's something else I need to share. I think it's time everyone knew who the father of my baby is." My heart started pounding. Lily's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I knew. I knew before the words left her mouth, but that didn't lessen the impact. "The father," she said, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent room, "is Mark Wilson, Emily's late husband." The world tilted sideways as the words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Gasps and whispers erupted from the guests, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and Lily's college friends huddled closer together, whispering frantically. But what hit me hardest was the lack of surprise on my parents' faces. They had known all along. Before I could process what was happening, Lily was already speaking again, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she turned to face me directly. "As Mark's baby is his only heir, I'm entitled to half of everything he left you, Emily," she declared, her tone triumphant. "The house, the apartment, the money. My child deserves their father's inheritance." The room spun, and I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the betrayal. "You're lying. All of you are lying. Mark would never—" "Oh, no." Lily's smile turned cruel as she pulled out her phone. "Then how do you explain these?" She held up the screen, and my world collapsed all over again. There they were, Mark and Lily wrapped in each other's arms, kissing in what looked like a hotel room. Another photo showed them holding hands in a restaurant I didn't recognize. "He loved me," Lily declared, her voice carrying across the silent room. "He was planning to leave you for me. We were going to tell everyone, but then—" She choked, tears streaming down her face. "Then the accident happened, and all our plans—" I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My body moved on autopilot, gathering my purse and pushing past the whispering guests. I stumbled out to my car, hearing my mom calling after me, but I was already backing out of the driveway, my heart racing with disbelief. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying those photos, trying to make sense of them. The restaurant photos must have been taken during those business dinners he claimed to have. The hotel probably during his frequent work trips. As soon as I walked through my front door, my phone started buzzing. It was Lily, sending messages, dozens of them, screenshots of conversations between her and Mark. "I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a long time. We'll tell everyone after the divorce. You're the only one I want to be with. I can't wait to start our life together." Message after message appeared on my screen, each one a fresh knife in my heart. The timestamps showed conversations going back months. My husband and my sister, plotting their future while I underwent fertility treatments, believing I was the problem in our marriage. That night, I paced through my house, touching Mark's things and wondering if everything about our life together had been a lie. The first call from my parents came at 7 a.m. sharp the next morning. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my heart racing. "Emily, you need to be reasonable about this," my dad started, not even bothering with a greeting. "The sooner you agree to split the inheritance, the easier this will be for everyone." The casual arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. "Easier for whom? For Lily? For you? For all of us?" My mom chimed in, her voice shaky. "You don't want this to get messy, dear." I could barely whisper. "When did you know about them?" There was a pause. The kind of hesitation that tells you everything you need to know before a word is spoken. "We've known for a while," my mom finally admitted. "Mark confided in us about 6 months before the accident." The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. They'd known for 6 months and still let me cry on their shoulders at his funeral, still accepted my money every month while knowing what he and Lily had done. Traitors. The word felt cold and final on my tongue. "All of you." I hung up and blocked their numbers, my hand shaking as I opened my banking app. I didn't hesitate to cancel the monthly transfer to their account. Let them ask their precious Lily for money. 2 weeks passed in a fog of missed calls and ignored text messages. Then came Lily's email. She'd sue me if I didn't voluntarily give up half of everything. The word voluntarily had never looked so much like a curse. I couldn't bear to reply, couldn't bear to think about Mark's betrayal, about how many people must have known, must have seen them together while I remained oblivious. The whispers at work became unbearable. Pitying looks from some colleagues, barely concealed smirks from others. Tom, my boss, and one of the few true friends I had left, called me into his office after I broke down in the middle of a client meeting. "Take some time off," he said gently. "Paid or unpaid, whatever works for you. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back." I nodded gratefully and packed up my desk that same day. The next few weeks blurred together as I became a hermit in my own home. I had groceries delivered, ignored the doorbell when it rang, and spent hours staring at old photos, trying to spot the signs I must have missed. Every happy memory now felt like a mockery. Every moment of our marriage tainted by the knowledge that he had been living a double life with my own sister. The news came via Facebook. Lily had given birth to a boy. The photo showed her beaming in a hospital bed, my parents hovering proudly over their new grandson. The baby was wrapped in the cream-colored blanket I had knitted for the shower, which felt like a deliberate jab. I closed the app before I could read the comments, but not before noticing she'd named him Mark Jr. A week later, the court summons arrived in a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Lily was suing for half of everything Mark had left me, claiming her son's right to his father's inheritance. The legal language was cold and precise, laying out her demands in stark black and white. She wanted the house, half the money, and partial ownership of the downtown apartment. I spent 3 days researching lawyers before settling on Richard Martinez, who came highly recommended for handling complex inheritance cases. "Ms. Wilson," he said, shuffling through the papers on his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "I have to be honest with you. Your sister has compelling evidence of a long-term relationship with your late husband. Text messages, photos, witness statements, including your own parents." He paused, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "In inheritance cases like this, proof of an intimate relationship, combined with a biological child, well, the courts tend to be sympathetic." I was still processing this devastating news when my phone rang that evening. An unknown number. "Hello, is this Emily Wilson?" a woman's voice asked, unfamiliar but somehow striking a chord of recognition. Something in the cadence, the tone, made my heart skip. "I'm Sarah Parker, Mark's mother." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the kitchen counter for support. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Mark was an orphan. He told me his parents died when he was young. He grew up in foster care." "Another one of his lies, I'm afraid." Her voice was bitter but not unkind. "Would you be willing to meet with me? There are things you need to know, things that might help you." We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown the next morning. Neutral ground. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, ordered a coffee I couldn't drink, and nearly dropped the cup when she walked in. The resemblance was uncanny. Mark had her eyes, her smile, even the way she carried herself. "I was at the funeral," she said after we settled into a corner booth, far from curious ears. "Back row, black dress and veil." I couldn't bring myself to approach you then. Mark and I hadn't spoken in years. I remembered her suddenly, the solitary figure who'd slipped out before the service ended. I'd been too lost in my own grief to wonder who she was, but now the memory crystallized with perfect clarity. "Well, are you coming forward now?" I asked, trying to keep suspicion out of my voice. After all the recent revelations about Mark, I found it hard to trust anything or anyone connected to him. Sarah reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been carried around for a long time. "Because I've heard about what your sister is claiming, and because, despite everything, I can't let another woman suffer from my son's lies." Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the envelope across the table. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were medical records from Boston General Hospital, dated 10 years ago, about a year before Mark and I got married. My eyes scanned the document, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Complete azoospermia, permanently sterile, no possibility of natural conception. The clinical terms jumped out at me, each one a fresh blow. "Mark had these tests done when he was 25, Sarah explained softly. "He was devastated by the results. It was one of the last things we discussed before our falling out. I couldn't speak. All those years of fertility treatments, the endless doctor's appointments, the hormone injections, the tears and self-blame. It had all been a cruel charade." The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Lily sat in the front row, cradling baby Mark Jr., while my parents flanked her protectively. She dressed the part of a grieving almost widow, perfectly demure black dress, minimal makeup, practiced look of sorrow. When she took the stand, she played to the gallery masterfully, tears glistening in her eyes as she described her great love with Mark. "All I want is what's fair for my son," she declared, her voice breaking. "He deserves his father's legacy." My lawyer, Mr. Martinez, waited until she finished her performance before he spoke. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that proves Ms. Thompson's entire claim is fraudulent." He approached the bench with the hospital records. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression unchanging. Lily's lawyer jumped up, objecting about chain of custody and document authenticity. "Those documents are fake," she shrieked, clutching the baby closer. "She forged them to steal my baby's inheritance." "Your Honor," Mr. Martinez continued calmly, "given these medical records show Mr. Wilson was sterile, we request a DNA test to establish paternity." Lily's smile was triumphant. "That's impossible. Mark was an orphan, and his body was cremated. There's no one to test against." "Actually," Mr. Martinez said, gesturing to the gallery, "I'd like to introduce Sarah Parker, Mark Wilson's biological mother." Sarah stood, and a murmur ran through the courtroom. Even from where I sat, I could see Lily's face turn ashen. "I'm willing to submit to a DNA test," Sarah announced clearly, "to determine if this child is my grandson." The judge nodded. "DNA testing is ordered. We'll reconvene when the results are available." Lily swayed slightly in her seat, all color draining from her face. Our mother rushed to support her, shooting me a venomous look. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. The courtroom was silent as the judge opened the envelope containing the DNA test results. Lily sat rigidly in her chair, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. "The results conclusively show," the judge announced, her voice clear and firm, "that there is no genetic relationship between the minor child and Mrs. Sarah Parker. Therefore, it can be concluded that Mark Wilson was not the father of this child." A collective gasp filled the room, and Lily's face crumpled as she began to sob, mascara running down her cheeks. "Miss Thompson," the judge's voice had turned stern, "would you care to explain why you perpetrated this fraud upon the court?" Lily clutched the baby closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was seeing several men at the time when Mark died and was cremated. I thought no one would ever know he had money, and I needed—" So you attempted to defraud your own sister? The judge's disapproval was palpable. You used your parents as unwitting accomplices in this scheme? I just wanted security for my baby, Lily whimpered, but her performance had lost its power. Even our parents looked stunned, finally realizing the extent of her deception. The judge's ruling was swift and unequivocal. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Emily Wilson. All claims to Wilson's estate by Lily Thompson are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Thompson, you're fortunate that Mrs. Wilson hasn't pressed criminal charges for attempted fraud. Outside the courthouse, my parents approached me. My mom was crying, and my dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. Emily's sweetheart? My mom reached for my hand. We had no idea Lily was lying. We can make this right. We've been struggling since you stopped the monthly transfers. I held up my hand. Don't. Just don't. I pulled out my phone and blocked their numbers right there, walking away without looking back. Sarah was waiting by my car. Are you okay? She asked softly. I surprised myself by laughing. You know what? I think I actually am. Or I will be. I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about that apartment downtown that Mark left me. I never liked it. Too many memories. But maybe you'd like it. Her eyes widened. Emily, no. I couldn't possibly. Please, I insisted. You gave me back my life with those medical records. Let me give you something in return. When I handed her the keys, a week later she broke down crying. I never thought I'd have a daughter, she whispered as she hugged me. That was 3 months ago. My family still tries to reach me through mutual friends and distant relatives, but I've cut those ties too. Lily sent a letter claiming she's changed, that she's sorry, that she needs help with the baby. I threw it away unopened. Instead, I have weekly dinners with Sarah. We're getting to know each other, sharing stories about Mark, the good and the bad. She's helping me see that while he wasn't the man I thought he was, that doesn't invalidate all the happy moments we shared. Yesterday, I finally packed away Mark's remaining things. Sarah helped me donate some to charity and store others in the attic. As we worked, she told me stories about Mark as a little boy before the lies began. It helped somehow to know that version of him existed. I'm not ready to date yet, but I've started living again. I returned to work full-time, joined a hiking club, and am planning my first solo vacation. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman looking back at me. Life has a way of surprising you. I lost the family I was born into, but gained a new one I never expected. It's not the life I planned, but maybe it's the life I was meant to have all along.